From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions, this is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg Isaacs.
And hello, everyone. Bo Williams in for Lori Tucker today, along with Greg Isaacs. Greg, great to see you, as always.
Good to see you, Bo.
We're going to be talking today about the execution of Byron Black. Happened earlier this week. The 69-year-old convicted in the 1988 murders of his former girlfriend and two daughters. We're going to get into that here in just a little bit, kind of talk about what happened and what happens moving forward as well. But first, we want to check in with our state capitol reporter, Tori Gessner. She was there yesterday as this all played out, and this is what she had to say afterward.
The procedure was the same, but the second execution under Tennessee's new death penalty protocol played out differently when it came to the inmates' response.
This is a classic case of a person who was put through extreme pain through a process of lethal injection.
The curtains to the death chamber opened at 10:31. That's when the state started administering the pentobarbital. Byron Black, wearing a yellow robe with a white sheet draped over his lower half, strapped into the gurney with his hands covered and taped. He was breathing heavily, at one point moaning, lifting his head 3 times. Black's spiritual advisor by his side, telling him to focus on his breath. At 10:33, Black says, "It hurts so bad." Angela Clay and her 2 daughters, Latoya and Lakeisha's family, watched from another room. A prison official shared their statement after the execution.
I thank God for this day, a day that was a long time coming. 37 years is too long, and it's not our fault.
Inside the death chamber, Black's spiritual advisor prayed for the victims before praying for Black. By 10:35, he stops moving. A minute later, a rock was placed on a ledge in the execution chamber, the signal that the injection was fully administered. Black's time of death, 10:43.
Today, the state of Tennessee killed a gentle, kind, fragile, intellectually disabled man in a violation of the laws of our country simply because they could.
His attorney, Kelly Henry, telling journalists her client was tortured, partly because a judge ruled the state didn't have to deactivate his heart defibrillator before he was killed, which Henry argues sent painful shocks to Black's body as the pentobarbital was injected. The victim's family calling it closure.
I can't say I'm sorry because we never got an apology. He never apologized, and he never admitted it, even on his dying bed, that he took it to his grave with him, and he knows he did it.
They're hopeful Angela, Latoya, and Lakeisha can finally rest in peace. Reporting in Nashville, I'm Tori Gessner.
All right, Tori, thank you. We're once again joined by Greg Isaacs. So, Greg, this is the second execution in the state this year, but there was a lot of controversy, a lot of discussion, especially around the defibrillator, the implanted device heading into this one. This one, definitely, obviously, a lot more discussion going into this one than we've seen in past executions. Something a little different this time around.
There is, and Bo, when you talk about an execution in the state of Tennessee, there's always some very vivid Eighth Amendment arguments regarding whether the method and manner of execution violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. For years, Tennessee, like many other states, had a 3-drug cocktail, midazolam for chromium bromide and potassium chloride, as their cocktail in lethal injection. There was problem after problem with this 3-drug cocktail. European countries quit providing it to states like Tennessee when they realized it was being used for capital punishment. There was a controversy that Tennessee was getting substitute drugs on the black market. So in 2020, Governor Lee said, "I've had enough. Let's have a study. Let's change gears." Then Tennessee joined 9 other states, soon to be 15, 6 others, and they have gone to a 1-drug cocktail, and so has the federal government, pentobarbital. But the story didn't end there with Byron Black. Byron Black had a defibrillator and ICD, and for the past few months, his lawyers have focused on the fact that they felt that as the pentobarbital was trying to stop his heart, that the defibrillator would repeatedly kickstart that vital process, creating excruciating pain, which it sounds like may have happened. So you see a flurry of litigation regarding the removal or disabling of the defibrillator. It was denied by a trial court, denied by the Tennessee Supreme Court. The drama continued to unfold. It was denied by the Supreme Court of the United States. So the defense team goes to a chancery court in Davidson County to get the defibrillator stopped prior to the execution. A chancellor in Davidson County agrees, orders him to be taken to Nashville General Hospital. And after all of the legal wrangling, all of the drama, the Nashville General Hospital said, no.
Yeah, we're not doing it.
We're not doing it. Then the court ruled that he had no further remedies. The execution took place, and we're back where we started on, is this manner and method of execution constitutionally violative of the Eighth Amendment?
Yeah, and you heard from his attorney, who was there as well, and saying that she heard him, and others may have heard as well, him saying that he was in pain. So how does this play? And there's going to be a lot of discussion about this afterward now, moving forward, especially about the defibrillator for people that are in that type of situation.
It is, and there was also another parallel issue which made the execution of Byron Black so unpalatable for so many people. He had an IQ of under 70, and with the state of the law as it is now in Tennessee, he would not have been most likely subject to execution. But since that issue had been previously litigated and appealed, it was collaterally stopped. They could not raise the issue again. So you had the companion issue of an intellectually disabled individual being executed, which Tennessee now prohibits. But, when you talk about the death penalty and you talk about constitutionality, the piece that we saw setting this up also highlights the other side of the equation, and that is the victims in this case. And this was a very violent murder in 1988 where Byron Black was on work release for getting into a domestic altercation with Benny Clay, the husband of his girlfriend Angela. While on work release, the first thing Byron Black does is go to the apartment of Angela Clay, shoots and kills her and her two young daughters in cold blood. Subsequently, Byron Black received a sentence of death as it related to the murder of Angela Clay, but life sentences for the two younger daughters. So he was not only on death row, but was also serving two sentences stacked for life without parole. So, on the other side of the equation, you hear from the victims and you hear that they never received an apology and that they needed closure. So two parallel trains that were highlighted, and every time we have an execution, this is the second one this year in the state of Tennessee. It highlights all of these very visceral issues.
Yeah, and you mentioned the victims, and again, this happened in 1988. It's now 2025. That's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time, but when you're talking about the ultimate punishment, death, there's a lot of appeals because you can appeal your conviction, direct appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals. You have the right to file a post-conviction proceeding in the trial court. Then those appeals go to the Court of Appeals again, to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Then you can appeal to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Then if you don't get relief at the Sixth Circuit, you can appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. So when you have a death penalty case, it is lengthy, it takes time, and it takes money and legal resources, and it goes on for decades. And this is a quintessential example. The Supreme Court, they have justices assigned when there is a capital execution scheduled. Justice Kagan is assigned to the Sixth Circuit, which we're a part of. His last-minute appeals were denied.
Right.
But it was interesting at the end, the focus, and they sought, a stay from Governor Lee, wasn't on guilt, innocence, mercy. It was on the method of execution as a result of his defibrillator.
Yeah, and it seems like in the previous execution we had back in, I believe that was in May of this year, there was, I think the governor did step in for a moment and put a pause. Obviously, it carried out, but it seems like that we had an incident there where I think we went back to look at. It was actually the pentobarbital and what have you, that make sure that everything was correct. I want to say during that one.
We did, and again, we had a long pause because of the controversy with the drug cocktail, how it's being procured on the black market allegedly by the state of Tennessee. But what you see is, ironically, everyone involved takes a lot of steps, and this is kind of an oxymoron, to make sure that executions are as humane as they can be under the circumstances, and that's why you have a moment of pause. So, in having tried 9 death penalty cases, followed a lot of death penalty cases, it's not like Netflix typically where it's the last minute someone's rushing to prove their client's guilt, their client's innocence. It's not a matter of guilt or innocence. It's typically something like we saw here, whether someone they were intellectually disabled, or whether there was a medical reason that the manner and method of execution would violate the Eighth Amendment prohibition. So that's the flurry of motions that you saw. Not that Byron Black was an innocent man and didn't do it, but just let's make the execution as constitutionally humane as we can.
Okay. I tell you, we're going to take a quick break. We have a lot more questions coming up for Greg concerning this. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a few moments. All right, welcome back. We're joined once again by Greg Isaacs. We're talking about the execution this week here in the state of Tennessee of Byron Black, a 69-year-old who was convicted in the deaths of his ex-girlfriend and her 2 daughters. Let's bring it back. You alluded to something just a moment ago, Greg, that I want to touch on here, talking about, obviously you've been a part of cases like this. They're going to do an autopsy after this, and he had the defibrillator, and they're going to be able to look at records and see when it was acting, what was happening at that time. Moving forward, depending on what they find, what they determine, and you heard the people, you heard from his attorney saying that he was in pain, or he was saying he was in pain. Are there things that in future cases that they will be going back looking at this one and saying, well, now hang on a second, the Byron Black case, blah, 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 blah?
Well, Tennessee has a catch-all. If a method is declared unconstitutional, let's say lethal injection or the new one-drug cocktail, pentobarbital, our state law clearly provides, as a lot of others, then you use the next constitutional method of execution, whether that's firing squad, electrocution, whatever. But as long as there's capital punishment, you're going to see a challenge to the manner and method that's imposed. So that goes without saying. Everything about the process, recently there's a lawsuit that's been filed challenging the pentobarbital by some death row inmates. And they also challenge things like Tennessee has a 12-hour blackout period prior to the execution that the inmate can't contact anybody except prison staff and attorneys. They say that it violates their First Amendment rights. But all of these last-minute appeals and gambles and Eighth Amendment, whatever, they're designed to do everything they can to try to spare someone's life. And it's again, 2 parallel trains. So, you understand what they're doing, and the courts understand what they're doing. Very rarely do we see someone saying, this is an innocent man that is about to be executed. We hear a lot about change, clemency, forgiveness. But on the other hand, in the flurry of lawyers being lawyers, the appeals, the victims sometimes become forgotten because, they have to sit here and be notified. Under Tennessee law, a victim has the absolute right to be notified of all hearings, all court appearances. They can be present. So, they're going through this from their perspective. And again, this senseless homicide of Byron Black's girlfriend and 2 young daughters took place in 1988, and the execution was just here in August 2025.
And that's what I was going to ask, and we kind of touched on it earlier. Are the victims' families prepped for this? I mean, when this happens, right, and then there's an arrest made, and the death penalty is out there, and they say if this person is convicted and they're going to be on death row, this isn't going to happen overnight. Are they prepared for it? Because they've been living this for decades.
I would venture to say that when a prosecutor meets with victims on the issue of whether we should ask for the ultimate punishment, and that's death, that they adequately and accurately paint the picture of how long it's going to take and all the different appellate avenues that's over. So just realize, if you want the ultimate punishment as your justice and you advocate that, and the district attorney thinks that's the appropriate legal thing to do based on the facts, the thing that you're also getting is a ramped up sense of due process for the defendant. And due process means more appeals, and appeals mean delays, and appeals mean times. So, if you want closure, you may not want the death penalty, but if you are patient and want to wait, it takes a lot of time because you're going to the trial court, to the Court of Appeals, to the Tennessee Supreme Court, to the Sixth Circuit, to the U.S. Supreme Court, and often you go all the way up and you come back and you start over again. So, in this case, we've got a delay of over 9 years.
Right.
Just to get here yesterday.
Yeah. And this is already happening now because this wasn't the last case currently on death row right now. I mean, there are others. So this process is playing out as we speak right now, as we have more individuals sitting there waiting to be
Tennessee,
executed.
we had a pause because for a period of time, the Supreme Court held that executions were unconstitutional. Since then, Tennessee has kind of slowly crept forward. There was a judge in Nashville, Judge Nixon, that would routinely stop death penalty appeals and cases in their tracks when it hit his desk. But other states have a rocket docket. Texas, over 500 executions a year. So I think Tennessee is now learning how to constitutionally execute people. We have 42 people currently on death row, 1 female. But you're going to see a lot more of this and a lot more of these challenges as these executions unfold.
Yeah, and we should note here Byron Black's execution, the 28th execution in the U.S. this year, which is the most in a calendar year since 2015. So already, and we're just over halfway through the year. So we've already hit 28. There will be more on the way. We've seen, especially in President Trump's first term, obviously he kind of raised the green light to proceed with executions. So we're starting to see more states once again bring that back. Ones that had it that maybe put it on pause. We're starting to see more of it now across the country.
We are, and President Trump has also given a mandate to the U.S. attorneys around the country, if it is possible and appropriate, to utilize the death penalty in federal prosecutions. Although it's very rare that one sees capital punishment in a federal scenario unless it's an act of treason, espionage, et cetera. But yeah, you're going to see a lot more of the death penalty. So this is not going to be something like with the 2 this year and the one with Black that really captures the media's attention. I think it's going to become, unfortunately, commonplace no matter which side of the courtroom you're on as we go forward.
Yeah, just real quick, in his first term, President Trump's administration carried out 13 federal executions, more than any president in modern history. So that's where things stand right now. We've got more to talk about with Greg, so keep it tuned right here, and we'll be back in just a moment. And welcome back. We're once again joined by Greg Isaacs. We are continuing our discussion following Byron Black's execution this week in the state of Tennessee, the second this year in the volunteer state. And Greg, I think we want to kind of give everyone out there a better understanding of how we get to that point where someone is on death row. So what is the process really from the time they're arrested to where they're sitting on death row waiting to be executed?
Well, that's a good question. So, typically when you have a case, there's a charge, and then the district attorney will make a decision on whether they are going to file a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. After they do, things change. You're entitled to 2 lawyers, a heightened sense of due process under Tennessee law. But then fast forward, you go to trial, and there's a trial on the merits. That is, did someone commit the offense of first-degree murder, felony first-degree murder, and then if the jury convicts, then you have a sentencing hearing. Now, the 9 cases I've handled, all the jury has been hung on guilt or innocence, so we never got to the sentencing part of a capital case. But what you do is there has to be a notice of aggravating factors. For example, recently in the Sean Finnegan case in Anderson County, there was a notice that it was the act heinous, especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, the hack factor, that it was the body was abused and tortured. And what the state has to do is prove those aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense, on the other hand, can prove a number of statutory, and they're very broad, mitigating factors. So the jury then decides, and this is how the decision of life or death is played out in a courtroom, whether the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay.
So after you have that, then the jury goes back. And, sometimes there's a surprise, like in the Parkland case in Florida, the school shooter that shot a number of young people in what I thought was, I was covering it live on Court TV, a very premeditated act of violence with an automatic assault weapon. And the jury decided not to impose a sentence of death in that case. So often what you see when you get to the point of the sentencing hearing is the defense wants to focus. They've already lost the ball game. I mean,
Okay.
they've been convicted.
Right.
So you want to focus on your client's mental health. You want to be able to tell his story in terms of mitigation, how he got where he is sitting in that chair in front of that jury. So a lot of mental health issues are presented. Some that we saw here in Byron Black, an intellectually disabled
Right.
person. But it's great to have that defense, but sometimes it works and it's viable, and a lot of times it's not, because typically when you see a district attorney in Tennessee, the crime is typically one of the worst of the worst. So that jury has been inundated with pathology, with autopsies, with photographs that are very graphic in nature, crimes that are very graphic in nature. So then when you kind of step back and ask them to consider your client's mental state and condition growing up, that's a tough ask. But Tennessee right now, as we sit here, there are 42 people on death row that were convicted and received a sentence of death that are awaiting execution on Tennessee's death row.
Yeah. You kind of back it up a little bit. You were talking about the process here. How much of it is, well, this is what the law says, and then how much of it, and we've already touched on this a couple times, but how much is it also they go back to the victim's family and say, what do you want? What would
My
you like to see? How do you want this to play
always
out?
they
Do they get the
consult
final say in all this,
victims
or?
before they file a notice of
Okay.
death. So that's a big part of what you see. And back to the jury that makes this decision. In Tennessee and elsewhere, you have a death qualified jury. So to begin with, you have a jury venire or panel that has been vetted and has already said, I could issue and vote for a sentence of death if I felt it was appropriate and I served here. So you eliminate anybody from the pool that has any philosophical, religious, ethical objections to the death penalty. So you kind of start a little bit, if you're on the defense side of the courtroom, behind the 8 ball. If you're on the prosecution side, you say, well, that's what the rules are. We need people that can play by the rules if they're going to be on this jury.
You find cases like this, crimes like this, that are highly publicized? Do you find that many times they're moved to different locations just because of the publicity in a certain area?
Often when you see the death penalty, you see publicity. When you see publicity, you see a motion for change of venue. But how we do it now in the 20th century, instead of picking up the circus and taking it to a different town, you bring in the audience from somewhere else. So you pick a jury from, for example, in the cases of death penalty cases I've tried, juries have come from Murfreesboro, Chattanooga, Davidson County, and have been sequestered and brought here to Knox.
Yeah, recently we saw an incident or a case where I believe it was a group was in Chattanooga, and the jury was taken to Memphis or to West Tennessee for a case there. Again, a lot of questions. And as far as the jury, too, they have to be prepped when they're going through this. Like you mentioned, sometimes there are beliefs whether or not they can be a part of this jury, but you already alluded, they're going to see a lot of things that a lot of us, it's not watching it on Netflix. It's not watching it on the networks, they're going to be subject to a lot of things that a lot of people do not get to see, and they have to be prepared for that as well.
And you cannot understate the emotional and mental impact that has. My good friend Randy Nichols, that used to be the Knox County Attorney General for years, told me, the graphic Chipman Street killings. He said, I can't unsee the evidence and the photographs that I saw, and I wish I'd never seen them. And that's a seasoned prosecutor that has spent decades trying the worst of the worst. But in those death penalty cases, he said he was personally affected by the graphic degree of the evidence.
Yeah, and that does say a lot. And you have to think sometimes these jury members, when they leave, obviously it must take some time for them too to overcome whatever it is they have had to go through or see or what have you.
Death penalty cases it's the ultimate punishment, but it's the ultimate trial. And you're asking people to make the ultimate decision, and it's typically very tough facts. And those victims are victims that should be in the Victim Hall of Fame because their loved one, their husband, their father, their sister, their brother have been subjected to a very graphic crime. So those are the considerations when you get there, but it's a very raw proceeding, and how it ends often as it did with Byron Black in Riverbend. Nashville, Tennessee.
And we have about 1 minute left. And again, we continue to see this out. I think one of the more recent ones, at least here in Knoxville, obviously with the Christian Newsom murders. And just recently we saw the families back in court again, another appeal. Again, this is something that continues to play out for these families. At some point there will be closure, but like you said, getting there could take decades for a lot of these families, as we just saw with Byron Black.
Yeah. We saw the case in Anderson County, Sean Finnegan, a very graphic case, convicted, and if we go another 38 years, I mean, that's going to be 2070.
Yeah. A lot of us won't be here to see that. Yeah.
I hope some of us are.
Yeah. Hope some are, but some out there watching. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the dates, I mean, and the time,
that's true.
That's a long time.
It's a long time, but very tough questions, very tough situation. But Tennessee, at the end of the day, Bo carried out the wishes of the district attorney, the victims, and the jury in this case, and Byron Black was executed.
Yeah. All right, we're going to end it there. Greg, as always, we appreciate you. Don't forget, Greg also appears on WATE on our WAT 6 on Your Side News at 5:30. We'll have that for you coming up today. We'll be talking more about this subject, and then we're always back on Wednesdays as well right here online at WATE.com, also on our 6 Plus app. So we appreciate you watching, and we'll do this all again. But Greg, as always, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bo.
All right.